Matthew 11. 11:28. But I'll start by just reading Luke 12. So at the beginning of 2022, or 2022,
Wow.
in the future, at the beginning of 2020, I felt like at that point, we didn't know about COVID too much. And I was still feeling in the midst of, in the low of this stuff. And I felt like the Lord just speak this verse to me, and it's Luke 12:32. It says, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." And honestly, I know logically that when we feel stuck, it is the kingdom of God. It is the presence of God and it's not just like His kingdom. It's the fact that He is the King in His kingdom that brings us freedom. It brings us life. It's not I understood that. It's not necessarily that got me. It was the first four words, "Fear not, little flock." And it could have said "Fear not, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom," and it probably wouldn't have hit me. It's really those that little flock words that really got me, because it made me realize again, I feel like I can just hear the heart of God, the heart of the Father all over this verse. It's He's not only telling us to fear not and to trust in Him, but He knows we're little. He knows we're still children. He knows that we get scared at times. He knows that we get anxious and we get tired. And I just hear, I still hear Him, "Fear not, little one. It's going to be okay. I desire your freedom. I desire your breakthrough just as much as you do, if not more. And I desire to give you everything that I have. All that I have is yours." The older son in the prodigal son story. And so that verse, and then this other verse, Matthew 11:28-30, so where y'all should be, says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And so I remember reading over this verse and just kind of sitting on this verse, and what I want to talk about a lot is in my process with the Lord and in trying to figure out where these things come from. I feel like there's a lot of different ways and reasons why I've ended up in this place that I am. The two that I feel like I can pinpoint is not knowing how to navigate disappointments and pain. And I grew up in this city called Sugar Land, Texas, and it was my second year in high school, it was rated the third safest city in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And so I just didn't, and my parents are incredible, and because they're incredible and because they cared so much about me and my sister, they did all that they could to make our life easy and to remove any hardships and remove emotional, physical, mental pain from our lives. And I'm they're incredible. But what it ended up, and growing up on Disney movies, it taught me this idealistic form of life. None of my friends dealt with deep emotional pain, dealt with deep physical abuse, or even sexual abuse. And I remember getting to Bethel, and I had this group of 10 friends, and 7 of them had been sexually abused by family members, by strangers. And I was I have no grid for this. I grew up in a bubble. Mm-hmm. And I think coming out of Bethel was the first time I was not in a school structure, and it was the first time I went into the ACT school, but it was the first time I was this is going to be my career. And I think life just hit me really hard. And I think I realized that I had a lot of idealism built around the way that I view the world and the way that I view life. And there was a lot of disconnect from what I thought would happen to what was actually happening in my life. And I think it impacted my relationship with God, because you read about these promises in the Bible. He speaks all these promises, even prophetic words, and I think at times I even put too much I don't even know if I agree with this statement, but I almost put like too much hope in the prophetic words, so that when they didn't come to pass, I felt broken. I felt really confused. I felt like God didn't show up for me, and so that's one aspect of what I feel like played into it. The other one is this. Since I got saved, I basically devoted my life to full-time ministry. Like, I wanted to just quit college and just run into full-time ministry. And I finished college and jumped into Bethel, jumped into Acts, and then now we're here. And I think in that process, what started, like as Paul says, what I started in the spirit, I have tried to finish in the flesh. And I have, like, at times fully bought into just this game of religion, and fully bought into just doing things like out of obligation and just going through the motions rather than actually communing with him in it. And that has 100% been exposed through Yana and Sophia in our house, because they are so, it's just like pure passion and love of God. And I remember when I first got saved, sitting in my one room for like hours, just wanting to pray, just wanting to like listen to IHOP. And it wasn't this like, oh, I need to spend time with the Lord. It was just like, it's what I wanted to do. I would invite friends over and then just leave them downstairs and go up to my room. And my friend Josh always brings it up. He's like, remember when you would ditch us all the time? And I don't feel that anymore. If I'm honest, my heart doesn't feel that. A lot of times it is just going through the motions, and I'm tired of feeling that way. And so this verse, like, come to me. Like, when I read that, the first three words, come to me, it like stopped me in my tracks, because I think sometimes in regards to our prayer life, so these two things that I feel like the Lord has exposed to me, maybe I'll do another teaching on how to navigate disappointments, but I want to focus on the, like, just going through the motions and kind of our mindset. And we're people who, like, prayer is our job. Like, it's what we do day in and day out. And so I want to talk about this. But as I would sit on this verse, I would realize more and more that I think that my secret place with God is my idea. Like, I'm like, I need to go spend time with Jesus, or I tell Leah, like, I'm going to spend time with Jesus. And I think if in the moments that I would slow down, and I think sometimes if we would slow down, we would realize that once we're in that place, he's actually been calling us. That it's not actually us, like, making the choice. It's actually him inviting us into this place of communion with him. And it really, for me, comes down to, like, our lack of awareness of his presence in our lives. And I think it is destroying us. That sounds really strong. I think it is absolutely destroying us. And I've been teaching staff dev, and I had this teaching with them on Monday, and one of them asked me afterwards, what do I do when I have fleshly desires that aren't sin, but they're also not, like, beneficial to my spiritual life? So for me, that'd be like equivalent to surfing. It's like, it's something I like to do. It's not sin, but it's also not necessarily like a spiritual discipline, you know? And we began to have this discussion about it, and I said this thing, and I was basically like, it doesn't matter. Whether I go when I go surfing, he comes with me. Whether I am aware of it or not, he lives inside of me, he dwells inside of me, and he comes. Like, he's with me all the time. And I think sometimes we have this weird, it's not weird, I think it's actually really normal that we think this way, but we divide our sacred life from our secular life, and we compartmentalize God into, like, the sacred, and then we kind of do this thing where we just treat him as if we're one of his employees, and we, like, check in and out with him. And so we wake up and it's like, okay, I'm going to go spend time with God. And we're all spiritual and we're aware of him, and, like, it feels great. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to eat breakfast, I'm going to talk to my roommates. And then it's like, I go to the prayer room and it's like, okay, I'm checked in again. And it's like, oh, it feels good and all this stuff. And we do this thing where we're checking in and out with God all throughout the day. And the reason why I say it's destroying us is because if you're aware if we would be aware of him, it would change how we did things all the time. Like, I think of people who like live in sin cycles, and people who like look at stuff who when they shouldn't be looking at stuff. They generally aren't doing that with someone else. They're doing it alone, you know? And it's because you live a certain way when you're around the people who love you. And when you're around people that you know love you, it pulls out the best in you. And it's really easy for me to be aware when Leah's in the room and my actions and how they affect her. It's actually easier for me to do that than to be aware of Jesus in the room and how my actions affect him. And I think there's something about us growing, and it's not even like him. Precious Lord. Praise the Lamb. You're good. It's not even that he has to increase his presence. Like, he's already here. It's our awareness that has an issue. And we need to, it's like that Misty song, like, you are as close as turned attention. And sometimes we just need to turn our attention to him. And yeah, so that in regards to prayer, but I think also our prayer life is, it will be like our lifeblood as life gets busy. And in the world that we live in, it is actually, I think, vital for us to stay healthy as a believer. In our world where productivity and results is almost God. Like, we put it so much on a pedestal that, and we perform for it. Like, the world asks for immediate pleasure and immediate results, and we do things out of that, and we live kind of like distracted by all that's going on in our lives. And I think we forget sometimes to just slow down and just be with him. Just completely abandon everything and just be with him. And I think the difficult task in not doing your prayer life, but even having a value for growing your prayer life, is that a deep prayer life doesn't always show immediate fruit. It's like you're building a root system. And so it goes against all these like mindsets that tell you, like, I need to be productive, I need to produce something, I need to perform. And it's really easy for us to, especially in full-time ministry, to just look over that aspect and just do things for Jesus. And it feels good. Like, productivity feels great. And I think God actually desires us to be productive. I don't think it's like out of his heart that we're like just lazy and don't do anything. But I don't think that he wants us to be productive while sacrificing just being with him. And I think a lot of times we live really distracted. And so I'll read the story of Mary and Martha. Y'all all know this really well. It's Luke 10, verse 38 through 42. If you want to turn there, I'm going to read it. It says, "Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me.' But the Lord answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her.'" And so Jesus' rebuke to Martha is that, one, she's anxious about many things, but she's not only anxious, she's distracted. She's distracted by the one good thing. What she's doing is good. Like, a desire to serve and a desire to host people and be hospitable is good, but there's something greater. And I'm sure y'all heard Brian teach on that a lot, but she forgot the one thing. She was trying to produce something, and she was anxious about not producing something for Jesus, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. We just can't sacrifice the great thing for the good thing. And I think we can be distracted by many things. Like, the obvious ones are like social media. We can be distracted by our like FOMO, like just fear of not being a part of something that sounds fun with friends and all this stuff. But, and I know this firsthand from experience, especially after this year, it's really easy to be pulled and to be distracted by doing things for him, but doing them without him. And so, and it's under this guise of like, I'm, and it's not like in vain. Like, it's not like he's disappointed or he doesn't see it, but there are still moments when he just wants you to like sit with him. And I think it's actually good for us to want to build something great for him. Like, to actually have influence, that we would gather people and preach the gospel to them, to share about the kingdom of God, to share about the kindness of God. It's actually a good desire. But if we don't spend time with him, if we haven't just been with him, we won't actually be able to set people free. And my pastor in second year would tell us this all the time. Like, influence may gather a group, but it won't break chains. And we have to get in this place of being with him. Like, I want to be someone that like when it says in Acts, they recognize that they had been with Jesus. I want us to be like that. More than like, we do good schools, we have an awesome prayer room, we do good teachings. I want people to be like, they have been with Jesus by the way they treated me, by the way they walk, by the joy that they have, by the hope that they have. And I don't know if we ever shared this with y'all, but Ben Kolinsky had a dream a long time, like almost when I first got here, where for y'all that don't know, Ben is part of our leadership team, but he's stuck in the States now. And he had this dream where it was me and him, and I think maybe John, and we were sitting around the table, and we had, like, Kairos had grown, and it got really big, and we were sitting there talking about like the success we had, and then all of a sudden Ben in the dream starts crying, and he realizes that we did it in our own strength, and we did it in our own talents, and then we all end up crying. And it's obviously this warning that like, it's actually possible. We have amazing people here. We have really talented and really gifted people, and so it is absolutely possible to build something really, really great and think that he was a part of it. And in reality, we did it all in our own strength, and we did it all on our own talent. And I just don't want to get to that point. And it affects the way that I do things. Like, when I'm doing it out of my own strength, I end up tired, and I end up worn out, and I feel overwhelmed. And when I'm doing it with him, I actually feel life coming out of it. And I want us to be people who are close to Jesus, just close to him. People who are willing to slow down, to abandon our schedules, and just be with him. And I think, I don't know if this is true for y'all, but I know it's true for me. I think a lot of people don't know how to just sit with him. We know how to ask for stuff. We know how to intercede. But I have a really hard time just sitting with him. And like, the prayer room and all that entails it's incredible, and there's a place for it, but it should not define your prayer life. And it should not be the sole like driving force of your prayer life. It should be something you do for sure, but it shouldn't take the place of getting in the secret place with him. And this one time I like went to spend time with him at like outside the prayer room at Bethel, and I just began like asking him for things, like what I would do in prayer, like go through my prayer list, pray for my family, like all these things. And I felt like he just stopped me in my tracks and was like, will you just sit here with me? Will you just not open your mouth and just sit here with me? And there's these moments when like worship is amazing, it's really good. Intercession is amazing, it's really good. And then there's also times where we need to just sit with him. We need to let him speak back to us. We need to just sit in silence and just let him refresh us and let his words wash us. And I have found that a lot of times I'm continually asking for things actually out of my own anxiety, because it gives me this false sense of power or this false sense of control that I like. It's almost like, I don't know how to explain this really, but in my mind it's like I feel out of control in this area, but I know Jesus hears my prayer, so if I ask him about it, it feels like I'm like stewarding it well or being responsible over it. And it actually leads me to be really impatient when it comes to my time with God. And it actually causes me to be really anxious entering my time with God. And I don't actually ever enter into that place of communion with him, because all I know how to do, or all I have been taught to do even, is to just ask. No one has ever really taught me to just sit with him, to just, like the Desert Fathers. I have found that like I'll go into prayer. Like my most passionate times in prayer are times when I need something of him. When I have something to ask, I'm passionate about it, and then that passion runs out as soon as I'm done asking. And it's usually because I have something to say. Like I have something I need of him, and so I have passion for it, but it's not passion for him. It's passion to make me feel better. It's passion for myself. And I will be the first to confess, I am much more passionate in the prayer room when it comes to intercession than I am worship. And it's not how it should be. I'm not saying that you should not be passionate about intercession. I'm saying if you're going to be passionate about asking him for things, be passionate about just loving him whether you get it or not. And I've looked into the Desert Fathers a little bit. If y'all don't know who the Desert Fathers are, they're basically like believers who abandoned their lives to have like a monastic. They basically became monks in the desert. And I began to read a little bit about the way they prayed, because these men and women who they're all labeled Desert Fathers, but there's women. They all talk about this deep communion with God. They all deeply lived out a Song of Solomon, and they all deeply knew that God loved them. And when you read about their prayer lives, it became really interesting to me. I was like, why do they never talk about intercession? It's like very rare that you hear them talk about intercession. And one of them even says, he talks about prayer, and he talks about not praying for things over and over again because he just simply trusts. He trusts that when he prays about something, that God hears his voice, and he can just trust God to take care of it. And I'm not saying this to apply to our prayer room. I'm saying this to apply mainly to like your like secret place with God, because what I'll do in my secret place is I'll pray for the things on my list in like a few minutes, and I'll be like, I don't know what to do, and then I'll just re-pray for those things. And I think there's a place for it, but there's also more. There's more ways that you can just be with Jesus. And so, like I said earlier, I still struggle with this at times. I feel like if I'm not asking him, I'm not being responsible, or I'm not stewarding something well. And the truth is that trusting him is actually really responsible. It's actually the most responsible thing. And I a lot of times catch myself asking for things over and over and over again, because I don't trust that he'll actually respond to me or take care of me unless I'm begging him. And rather than just asking him and then trusting. And so the Lord's just spoken to me that trusting him is actually really responsible. I don't have to beg him to feel responsible. about prayer or feel responsible about the things that I'm trying to navigate in my life. And there's these root systems. So I kind of want to talk about like mindsets that have played into this for me. And so there's these root systems that we all have that produce a certain fruit. And so a good example would be, you can have like the root of love, so patience is a good one. So Paul talks about patience in the gifts of the Spirit, fruit of the Spirit, and then he talks about patience in like the love passage, but he never tells you to pursue patience. He tells you to pursue love, and in the pursuit of love, you'll get patience. And so there's this root system that's built of, you pursue love and certain fruit comes out of that. And so one of the mindsets that I have sorely bought into, and I think a lot of the church has bought into, is this difference between success being training and success being trying harder. And I think the church a lot of times pushes this, just put your head down and try harder. And we wouldn't say it that way, but it ends up just being striving and performance. And I thought about this, if you're having a hard time understanding this, if I told you tomorrow you're going to try hard in the CrossFit Games, it would produce a certain reaction out of you. Rather, if I told you tomorrow you're going to train for the CrossFit Games, it's like in one, it's like, okay, I guess I'm in this thing and I'm just going to try. I might kill myself, but I might try. Whereas in the training thing, you're like, just growth is the goal. In training, success is growth. It's not perfectionism. And a lot of times when it comes to spiritual disciplines, we expect perfection out of ourselves. Not just in prayer, but I think especially in prayer, but also in like the gifts of the Spirit. It's like, I'm sure y'all have heard this analogy, but it's like when someone prophesies and then they get it wrong, it's like, oh, I guess you don't have the gift of prophecy. Rather than telling them like, hey, get up and try again, it's almost quenched, and it's just like we expect people to get it right 100% of the time from the get-go, and that's just not how it is. And so it's a really like unrealistic expectation to have on ourselves. And so in regards to prayer, so I'm just talking out of my own experience, so y'all might not think this way, but I have this weird expectation in regards to like what is a successful prayer time. And the two main things is, one, that it would end up in a heavenly encounter where I'm like caught up in the Spirit and having an open vision like that, like manifesting, like all, like just, you know what I mean, right? Like high spiritual encounter. That's one measure of success. And two, for whatever reason, I have this magical hour number that's built into my brain. That it's like, if I'm going to spend time with Jesus, it has to be an hour. And there's been moments over the past year where that feels overwhelming. Let alone, I'm like, I guess it's just God's job to show up. It is God's job to just show up how he wants. But it's a really unrealistic expectation to have on your prayer life. And because of that, when it doesn't happen, I end up feeling like a failure in prayer, and I end up feeling really overwhelmed. And sometimes I exit my prayer time anxious that nothing happened, that I didn't do something right because these weren't the results, or I felt distracted 59 minutes out of the hour. And so a successful prayer time, just to break this off, like we're going for this training thing. We're not going for this try harder thing. It's just showing up. It's being faithful. And I've said this a few times to maybe a few of y'all. When you get to heaven, he's not going to say, well done, good and accomplished servant. He says, well done, good and faithful servant. He's looking for people who will show up day in and day out when they don't feel it, and when they do feel it, and when they're up, and when they're down, and when they're busy, and when they're not busy. And whether you get through your prayer list or whether you have an encounter, it's just bonus. The fact that you show up is success. And in regards to the hour number, having a little kid that wakes up early in the morning, y'all are about to experience this. An hour sometimes feels like forever. And it feels like, how in the world am I going to get everything I need to get done today? Which are not bad things. They're things that Jesus told me to do. How am I going to get all this stuff done today and spend an hour and take care of my kid and make sure my wife feels loved and all of these things? And an hour just feels really, really overwhelming. And so because we're going for this training thing, if you got to start at like 5 minutes, just spending time with Jesus for 5 minutes, it's okay. Like, we shouldn't be beating up ourselves over the fact that we didn't spend a full hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours. But we do because we read about the greats. We read about these revivalists that went before us that wake up at like 3 a.m. and spend 5 hours with the Lord before they do anything. And it's beautiful. I absolutely think it's beautiful. But what is meant to activate us and be life-giving to us becomes a burden for us. And we try to live up to these expectations, and it just becomes a heavy burden that we carry around rather than this lighthearted thing of, let's just try to grow in it. And if you have to start with just 15 minutes of quiet time with Jesus, it's okay. Don't beat yourself up. If in 3 years it stays 15 minutes, I would maybe challenge you a little bit. We're going for this training thing. If you have to start with 2 minutes, it's okay. And the truth is that life shouldn't be lived rushed. It shouldn't be lived rushed, and it shouldn't be lived far away from God. And we shouldn't have to sacrifice our emotional and spiritual well-being to do the things that Jesus did without being with him, without doing it with him. And you read about this in the Bible, not in those words, but you read about people who try to pay for an anointing. They're trying to do the things that Jesus did without actually building history with him. And they get rebuked by the apostles. And then you read about the sons of Sceva who try to go do the things that the apostles are doing without the history and without the relationship with Jesus, and they get their butts beat. And it's what it looks like to just fill our lamps with oil, to just show up day in and day out and just be faithful. Yeah. And intentions are great. This is where the rubber hits the road for us. Intentions are great. Like, if you intend to spend time with Jesus, it is phenomenal. But intentions that aren't followed up on with time can actually harm a relationship. I'm not saying it harms it on his end. I don't think it necessarily quite works like that. But he has emotions, guys. He's not a stoic taskmaster or a robot. And you read, like, when David is talking to Nathan, and he's like, I live in a beautiful palace, and God doesn't even have a home. And then you hear God's response to Nathan, the prophet, and he's like, I've never had a home. Since I brought Israel out of Egypt, I've never had a home. And you can almost hear this, like, sadness in God's voice. And people have told me, like, God has emotions, but I generally think he only has happy, good emotions, you know? And sometimes it's not that that's like a sad, like, God's depressed or anything, but it moved God deeply. You can hear it, like, as you're reading it. He's like, no one's ever asked to build a house for me. And all that to say, like, intentionality communicates value to him. And I can intend to do the dishes, and I can tell Leah, like, I intended to do the dishes. After a certain point, she's like, I don't care what you intended to do. Like, if you don't do them, it doesn't mean anything to me. And so our intentions to spend time with Jesus have to be followed up with. They have to be put into practical action. And I think that if we would show him that we just actually desire to just be with him, to not ask things of him, I think he likes that too. But I think this is what it looks like, going back to, like, Lee's message. It looks like to transition from being a kid to being a friend. And that kids, it's actually very reasonable for Co to ask me things. But for my friends to constantly be asking me for things and to not actually just hear me out at times, and to have this like communion and this exchange can actually be really hurtful. And I'm not saying that we like hurt God or anything, and I don't even think he expects it of us. That's the thing. But I know that it moves his heart. And I want to be someone that does the stuff that God maybe not like, he doesn't like force on us, but it still moves him. And it still affects his heart. And yeah, so just to kind of wrap up, a few practical things that I have felt have helped me. Some of them have helped me more than others. But a few, just these three. The first one is praying and meditating on the scriptures. So Jeffrey has actually been really influential in helping renew my mind in this aspect, because I tend to be like, I'm going to meditate on the word. And I try to for like 15 minutes, and it feels like I just repeated words for 15 minutes and got nothing out of it. And it's because I feel like, well, I'm never doing that again. Obviously, I can't meditate, or I don't know how to meditate, because I have this thing of like, I need to try harder, and I'm not actually going for training. And Jeffrey has been I'm like, how do you study the Song of Solomon? Like, I want to get into the Song of Solomon. How do I study it? And he's like, it's not meant to be studied. It's meant to be prayed, and it's meant to be sung. And just the idea that, and he's told me, like, there's days that it's like, feels super mundane, but even the mundanes build your history. And so to repeat it, we're going after this training thing. There will be moments when you go to like pray and meditate on the word, and it is like, maybe you do it for 5 minutes and you feel like you wasted 5 minutes of your time. And the truth is you didn't. God was there with you, and he is watching you attempt to grow, and he loves it. He loves that you would set aside time and just want to be with him, to meditate on the word, to encounter him in the word, not through deep theological understanding, but emotionally encounter him. And there's two ways to interact with the word. A lot of times our community tends to interact with the word only through study. And obviously that's good. We should desire to study the word. But there's also this beautiful aspect that a lot of the church has a deep tradition of just praying and meditating on the words of God and letting them wash over you. So that's one thing. The second thing is silence. This one by far has been the most impactful to me, because it feels like the only thing that gives me life. And I don't have any answer for it. I don't know why it is this way. All I know is that if I will lock myself in a room, no music, no worship, no instrumental music, like no me praying, no me asking for things, no worship, no praying in tongues, just sitting there, I feel extremely refreshed coming out of it. And I don't know why, other than I read one of the Desert Fathers say that silence is like when you take a glass cup like this one, and you stick it in a muddy river, and you can't see through the water because it's muddy. And then if you just let that glass sit there for long enough, the dirt will float to the bottom, and then you can see through the water again. And he says that's what silence does in our lives. It lets everything just like filter down and gives us clear perspective. And it is, I think, why it's so life-giving is because it breaks any mindset that puts productivity on the pedestal and puts results and like immediate fruit in the place of God. Because it is it's not even like you can say, I had a good worship time. It's just, I sat there with God. And it does something. So that's the second thing. The third thing is letting him ask you questions. And if you feel like he's not asking you questions, if you feel like he's silent, ask questions to him that you think he would ask you. And so I've had moments where I'm like, Lord, ask me a question. My heart is messed up and I feel overwhelmed and anxious. Ask me something. And it's silent. And what I'll do is, rather than waiting on him, I'll be like, God, is there anything I'm anxious about that I shouldn't be anxious about? Is there anything I'm carrying that I shouldn't be carrying? And like 99% of the time, he has something to say about it. He has something to say about how I'm carrying and the things that I'm carrying into my time with him. So that's the third thing. And so, yeah, all that to say, I know what it feels like to feel rushed. If anything, this little season of a year and a half that we've been here in Bali, I know what it feels like to feel rushed and really busy. And I have... Bless you. I've bought into doing things out of religious routine, hoping that something would change. And it has resulted in deep anxiety and feeling very worn out a lot of the time, and very overwhelmed and slightly depressed. And I want us to just take any pressure off of ourselves in regards to this. We're not trying harder to be better Christians. We're training. Like, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for our capacities to expand. We're looking for growth. And yeah, so I just kind of want to go into ministry time for anyone that feels dry, anyone that feels worn out, anyone that feels tired, anyone that's been feeling like you've been struggling with anxiety or depression. I'm not even talking about like every day I wake up and feel depressed. If it is that, I do want to pray for you. But also just the like, I feel overwhelmed a lot. And so, Alyssa, if you want to start praying, if you're in that category at all, or if you just want prayer, like if you just feel like I've been doing this out of obligation and I don't want it to feel like obligation anymore, like I want passion to come out of me, just go ahead and stand up.